Hello and welcome to this presentation on the introduction to data management, or rather the management of personal data within Sage CRM. This is the first of a set of lessons that are looking at the way in which personal data can be managed in an intentional way within Sage CRM. So we are going to be looking very much at the intentionality of personal data management, but we will be building on this over the next few lessons. So this is introducing how features can be used by a business to help them meet the requirements of the data protection legislation that exists within particular jurisdictions. So although I will be mostly talking about legislation like GDPR, we'll see that there are other laws in other jurisdictions which are all about the protection of individual rights and how organizations are accountable for how they handle personal data. Now, going in and talking about this is that I should really remind you that this is something that is an introduction. I'm not a lawyer, so I am not here giving you a deep analysis of the GDPR and other related laws. And what this is to be a high-level sense of the responsibilities of working with personal data and the responsibilities or the capabilities that Sage CRM has as a system. Now, Sage CRM, like any CRM system, can hold vast amounts of personal data. And that's going to be names and addresses, all capable of identifying individually all members of the public and the contacts that we have. That can be less sensitive information, so it can include things like the purchase history and preferences, but it all represents a goldmine of information which can be attached to other information for inappropriate purposes. And Sage CRM systems, like any system, are vulnerable to cyber attacks, and the consequences of mismanagement of data, including allowing yourself to be vulnerable to cyber attacks, can result in data breaches, which can then result in financial losses, reputational damage, and legal penalties as well. Now, all this will put into the context of Sage CRM. So if we think about this, to mitigate risks and to comply with the rules that are appropriate for your jurisdiction, whether you're in the States, in Canada, or in Europe, or in the UK, businesses need robust data management strategies. Sage CRM has a whole set of features designed to protect the management or ensure the protection of personal data. It's entirely up to a business how they implement that and use them. And so this is a question of tools are laid out for availability, but it is a business's responsibility to manage that data. And we're going to be seeing in the next few lessons how things like the management, the active management of consent, the idea of data anonymization, the deletion of communications and documents, and flagging of data shared externally can be used to allow you to manage and report to manage that customer data and report to customers exactly how data is used. There's a whole set of different responsibilities that the different data protection laws around the world are place obligations onto an organization. So as we think about this, there are different laws that apply in different countries to protect the privacy and personal data of individuals. The purpose of all these laws are to establish rules and regulations governing the way in which a business collects information, uses it, stores it, how it discloses that data to other systems and to other organizations as well. And each law will specify details that may vary in exactitude, but there will be different penalties as well, depending on your jurisdiction. But the things that we very often get asked about in terms of when audits are being carried out is to say what systems we can, what laws we can allow Sage CRM to comply with is things like the California Consumer Privacy Act. And this is a significant piece of privacy legislation for the US. It provides consumers with certain rights regarding their personal data, including the right to know, the right to delete, and the right to opt out of the sale of their personal data. If we go over to another part of the world in which there's the Singapore has its own PDPA, or Personal Data Protection Act, and that's a data protection law that provides individuals with various rights, such as the rights to access that data and to correct personal data. And back over into North America as well, we have the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, or the PIPEDA, which is Canada's federal privacy law, and that applies to personal information collected, used, or disclosed by organizations in the course of commercial activities. So there are different laws around the world, and what Sage CRM is focused on in terms of is trying to provide a set of tools and features that will satisfy the most stringent of these. Certainly, the one that concentrates most of our minds here in the UK is going to be the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, which is a comprehensive data protection law that came into effect back in 2018, which aims to protect the personal data of individuals within the European Union. Now, although that was implemented by the European Union, and I'll mention about what's happened since Brexit, although it was implemented by the European Union, it applies not only to organizations based in the EU, but it also applies to those that have customers and contacts in the EU. So it impacts on any businesses around the world that has any interaction with European citizens. Now, after the UK left the EU at the end of 2021, the UK's version, or the EU version of the GDPR, was replaced by the UK's own version of that, sometimes known as the UK GDPR, or the United Kingdom General Protection Regulation. And this is all about defining what personal data is and how it can be processed by anyone. And it's actually a supplement to an earlier piece of legislation called the UK Data Protection Act, which dates back to 2018, that was then amended after Brexit into 2021. So the law in the UK is up to date, just as it is in Europe, and as well as in all those other jurisdictions that I was talking about. The GDPR has some very important key concepts, and this is to do with While in processing, these core principles are that there should be lawfulness, fairness, and transparency, so that the data processing must be lawful, fair, and transparent to the data subject. So that's if you are keeping information about a person, they have a right to be able to know what information you're keeping about them. And also, data should be collected for specific, explicit, and legitimate purposes. So there has to be a reason that the customer understands why their personal data is being held and processed. And part of that idea is the concept of data minimization, which is that only the necessary data to allow for the business function to operate should be collected. So if you never have to deal with the date of birth, you shouldn't be storing the date of birth. That's that type of thing. So data also, there's an obligation placed on the idea of data being accurate and kept up to date. So if you are capturing information about people, you shouldn't be storing information that you find very difficult to keep up to date, like the number of children that somebody might have. You can't store that type of information within your system because that is highly personal, it's highly sensitive, it's not related to the business transactions that you're carrying out, and you have to then actually, if you were doing it, disclose it to the customer, and you'd also be under a responsibility to always be monitoring it for accuracy and being kept up to date. Now, having said, giving you an example of the sort of thing that would be inappropriate to store within a CRM system now is that data also should be kept only for as long as necessary. If so, somebody is no longer a customer and they stop being a customer, then you should only keep that data for as long as, for example, warranties are running, or for as long as the tax records require you to keep customer data for that. So there's a set of rules around data retention as well. And you've got the question about integrity and confidentiality as well. So data should be processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security, including protection against unauthorized processing. And that's where you would need to think about, well, is my system secure? So am I running in an environment which I've implemented everything with HTTPS, so there's no vulnerabilities that I've built into the system? And have I managed to make sure that users in one particular geography or business function can only look at the records that are needed for that business function? So there's an intersection with Sage's internal user and application and territory security policies. Really, Sage CRM has got some fantastic features around that, and we'll be developing those ideas in some later courses as well. And then there's also the question that you have to have accountability. So organizations are responsible for and must be able to demonstrate compliance with the GDPR. So there's not a question of wishful thinking. You need to be active about this, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are placed on a business in terms of the idea of who is going to be the data owner and data and person who's the controller of that data, and whether you carry out appropriate risk assessments associated with the system that you've got. Now, there are then other principles that come into play. This is very much from the focus of the individual. And much of European legislation is around about what rights does a citizen have. And they include the right to be informed. So that's the individuals have the right to be informed about how their data is being processed. So if you are working with systems like an integrated system with the accounts, then you need to be able to be explaining that your account data inside the financial system will cause that to flow through into the CRM system, so that data that you're keeping in terms of the conversations that you have, well, this is a bit like when it says phone calls will be recorded for training and quality purposes, or that type of thing, where you need to inform customers that interactions like emails will be logged within the CRM system. And customers have a right to, or individuals, never mind customers, they may not be customers, but individuals have a right to access that personal data that you're storing about them. And if they ask to see it, you have to provide the information that you store. So thinking about the reports that you have, will they be able to deliver that information? And individuals also have the right to have inaccurate data corrected about them. Individuals also have the right to have their data deleted in certain circumstances. So again, it might be that you really don't want certain elements recorded within the system about you. There may be a business case for some of that, but customers have the right for certain data to be deleted, and that may change the way in which you can carry out business with that person. Individuals also have the right to restrict processing. So if individuals could say that they don't want data passed across into an email system. They don't want the fact that they don't want direct mail to come to them. They only want phone calls, or they don't want phone calls. This is the idea that individuals can restrict processing so they can choose the way in which that data is processed or used in certain circumstances as well. And you also have the ability to, or they have the right, I should say, not ability, but they have the right to see where their data comes from. Now, I just need to go back onto that previous slide. I managed to click on the wrong item there. But so they have the right of portability. So they have the right to obtain and reuse their personal data for their own purposes. So if you're keeping transaction information about the way in which somebody uses, say, for example, software which is billable, you'd be aware that the customer has the right to say, well, what is my usage pattern? Because I want to pick that up and I want to be able to compare that with another supplier. Customers also have the right, or individuals have the right to object to the way in which decision making and profiling take place. So the rights to the way in which anything is passed across into another system, and that's interesting when it comes to the way in which automation may take place, and that has implications down the line for some of the software involved in artificial intelligence as well. Other important concepts. This is something that really I've touched on already, to say that because there has to be transparency and the customer has to be aware of what's going on, consent must be freely given, specific consent for certain types of processing, and it has to be informed and unambiguous. So it's a clear choice about what the customer or individual is deciding about that. And then there's also some other very important concepts, such as the Data Protection Impact Assessment, or DPIA, and this is something that has to be carried out. A DPIA has to be carried out for any high-risk processing activities. There's not entirely a clear definition of what a DPIA is, depending on who you look at, but it's, as a principle, you need to be able to think in terms of a risk assessment for your data, and it's better that you do it rather than don't do it and have to do it retrospectively after something like a data breach has occurred, because If there is a loss of data or a data breach where somebody accesses data that they should not have done, organizations must notify supervisory authorities and individuals of certain data breaches. And that becomes the responsibility within an organization of the data protection officer. So again, depending on the size and the nature of your organization, organizations must appoint a DPO, a data protection officer. So this is something that was introduced by GDPR, and the responsibilities of the DPO is to inform the controller or processor of their obligations. So this is somebody who stands outside, if you like, the operational use of the data, where somebody is managing it, and there is somebody else who is doing the work with the data, manage to tell them of their obligations and to then monitor that compliance. And company employees can use a DPO for any privacy-related inquiry, because employees themselves are governed by the data privacy and data protection laws like GDPR, and employees and individuals can also seek advice on protecting personal data within an organization. That has implications when you're integrating Sage CRM in the context of other Sage systems like HRMS and things like that. So DPOs will be the people, the data protection officer, the people who will drive the idea of carrying out the data protection impact assessment or the risk assessment on that, and finally looking at the way in which they interact with the legal authorities around data as well. So in the context of the UK, that's the Information Commissioner's Office. And certain companies of certain sizes have to be registered with the ICO and have all of that infrastructure of the DPO in place. That then, some of the important concepts of the GDPR. If you don't follow those, then you run the risk of potential damaging consequences for non-compliance. And so if a company breaches the GDPR, then they could face significant financial penalties and reputational damage. Now, I particularly like when I was preparing for this, that the document just glossed over the idea that there was some sort of significant financial penalties. Well, in the context of the European Union, and this, remember, this is, if you might well be a North American company, but if you're processing European citizen data, then in theory the European Union could impose a fine of up to 20 million euros, or 4% of a company's global annual turnover, whichever is higher. And that's really quite significant. And in the UK, although we're opted out of the Brexit means that we're no longer there. Actually, it's imposing fines of up to £17.5 million, or 4% of a company's annual turnover, whichever is higher, for serious breaches of GDPR. And so they're actually equivalent, whatever you're doing. So there are financial penalties included, and that doesn't even go on to then the compensation that may have to be paid if you're not managing the data correctly, and then the legal costs on top. So there's huge potential financial risk if we're not managing data for our customers correctly. Leaving aside the whole reputational damage, the loss of trust, the damage to a reputation, and all of the negative publicity that would flow from a data breach or gross misbehavior when it comes to the use of customer data. And there are all sorts of things like boycotts and things like that. But there are other consequences as well. You can have severe business disruption and the pain of having a regulatory investigation take place on an organization. So there's all sorts of issues associated with being caught out by the GDPR liabilities that if you fail to meet them. If we move to just thinking about what Sage CRM does, though, you think about what we have in Sage CRM is a system that provides sales, marketing, customer service, and all sorts of operational functionality to customers to allow them to maintain and manage customer contact data. Now, Sage CRM doesn't just sit on its own. It's working with websites which are self-service, dealing with other applications which are interacting with it through the REST or the SOAP web services. Then you're uploading data from different sources, whether that is low quality data such as data leads, or whether you are importing information from so-called clean sources such as conference or conference memberships, or whether you're dealing with the ad hoc import of data from Exchange or your email account when you're uploading emails and adding contacts as and when you're carrying out actions. So there are all sorts of ways in which we can have data flow into Sage CRM, including this idea of integration with an account system and having suddenly hundreds of contacts flowing from the account system into Sage CRM as data is synchronized. Sage holds this personal data about customers and prospects. We have to be able to have an active approach to managing all of that data, and to be able to think about how Sage CRM can be customized, because we can have extensive changes to a CRM system because of its configuration. And it's not just how data flows into Sage CRM, but also how data can flow out of the system. So Sage CRM can be integrated to MailChimp, and personal data can be exchanged there. You can think about the integration being enabled and subscriber information to being synced backwards and forwards. And the integration can take information ultimately that has started out at an account system, whether that was X3 or Intact or 300 or whichever product you're using, that can flow into Sage CRM, where you then, through an integration, pass that through to MailChimp, which is an external system, not only potentially outside the company. It is outside the company, it's outside the system as well, which is then interacting and generating either social media interactions or through plain email clicks, etc., which are fed back into Sage CRM for additional processing. So there's all sorts of awareness of how things are flowing, and we've not even, this diagram is just thinking in terms of the flow from the account system into a MailChimp subscriber list. But there's likely to be other things that we're doing as well, such as the interaction and passing data backwards and forwards to Exchange, for example. All of this can fall into the category of personally identifiable data, or PII as well, personally identifiable information. And this is anything that can be used to identify a natural person, and it encompasses a lot of different data points. We have, under just about every data protection law that I've looked at, this idea that you as an organization who is the data controller and also then the data processor have to take reasonable steps to protect any PII, personal identifiable information, within the system. And in the case of GDPR, the official definition is any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. Now, it's challenging because we obviously think that a person is identified by their name, and that's perfectly true. A person could be identified directly by certain information, by a name, but they can also be identified indirectly through an identification number, for example. So a customer code can be is a PII element. And another thing that you can use to personally identify things doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be directly the information that we see here. So it can be information that goes down to IP addresses being used, combined with other geographical codes to start to work out who somebody might be. So if information can be combined with other information to produce personally identifiable information, that still falls underneath the category of GDPR. Now, Sage CRM obviously holds personal data about customers and prospects. We talked about the idea of being active about it. We have to think that we have that responsibility as an organization. But amongst data, there's two types of data. There's personal data, and then there's sensitive personal data as well. Nearly all businesses will hold potentially some sensitive personal data. Now, in your own internal systems, your HR systems, that could be an employee's or even an employee's bank details. It could be employees' date of birth. It could be information about their gender identity as well. So all of these things are highly sensitive information, and it can come through into Sage CRM if there is a business need to hold certain types of information. So if you have a membership system involved in healthcare, you could then find yourself storing not just personally identifiable information that is personal data, but also personal sensitive information. And membership systems, in whether it's in a sports club or whether it's in a medical environment, or whether that is the type of thing that suddenly is immediately highly sensitive. And because Sage CRM is completely customizable, you can add any number of fields into Sage CRM, either through directly new fields into existing tables, or new tables and new entities to store additional information, or even inside the ephemeral type of information within key attributes. This suddenly raises questions of where additional personal data is going to be held and what nature is it. So, for example, are you storing social security numbers or other passport numbers, or are you storing information like national insurance numbers? Any government ID suddenly becomes potentially not just personal data, but sensitive data. So you need to have a sense of what items of data fall into which category. Now, the good news is that Sage CRM, which we're going to be exploring in the next few lessons, will look at the specific functionality to help customers meet their data consent management obligations. And that includes over the idea of extending that management over custom fields. But because of the customization ability of Sage CRM, the responsibility for any management of the personal data falls and remains with the customer. So it's the customer who has to identify those fields and manage that data according to the law. So it's not a question of Sage CRM becoming responsible for that data, because it's not Sage CRM that is holding, controlling, and processing the data. That is the customer. So personal data is any information that relates to an individual, either alone or when combined with other information that the customer might possess. For the purposes of this, we're going to be looking at really just the main data that Sage CRM holds when we look at the next few lessons, but we will be able to explore as well how other data is added into the system. Now, GDPR applies to any organization around the world that stores, processes, and transfers data of EU citizens or EU residents. These are known as the data subjects, and it's the same in the context of the UK law, and it has the equivalent ideas within the concept of each of the legislation examples that I gave earlier on. Now, in the context of managing data, there are two important concepts. This is the two types of what are we when we're working with data. Are we the data controller or are we the data processor? So the idea of the data controller is the person or the part of the organization that determines the purposes and means of processing of personal data. The processor is processing that data on behalf of the controller. And in our case, I've already looked at the idea of somebody has to, in Sage CRM, because we can pass data out to, for example, MailChimp, or we could be creating email campaigns internally within Sage CRM, or we could be writing mail shots directly from Sage CRM. All of that is within the organization. So you have within an organization, within a data you have a data controller and data processor. It can be that your data processor can sit in another company. So, for example, if you have a business that makes heavy use of membership mailers, sending out membership cards, for example, then that printing of the membership card and stuffing of the envelopes may take place in a fulfillment house. So that may be a marketing company specializing in the idea of printing of cards, in which case you have to think about how data is passed from one organization to another organization so that you're not losing control of the customer data. And so that's, if you're passing across information that might include sort of person's name, address, their customer or account number, then that's something you have to think about in the way in which you're passing that, because all of these privacy laws, and especially GDPR, has special obligations for both the controllers of data and the processors of data. And part of it is the concept of data protection by design and by default. And we'll be exploring some of these ideas just now and in the subsequent lessons. So essentially, data by design, data protection by design is where we are thinking about data privacy as an integral part of the creation of the actual or the implementation of CRM in the first place. So literally deciding only to store information that needs to be stored, all of those principles that I looked at earlier on. And then we have the idea of default, which is just making sure that if you are passing any information anywhere, again, it is only looking at what needs to be in the system. So organization has to take care of all of the necessary technical and organizational measures to demonstrate that data protection is integrated into the development lifecycle of and working processes of the customer, of the system. Okay. Now, taking that idea a little bit further, I want to think about the idea of a data protection impact assessment. This is a tool used to assess the risks to the rights and freedoms of individuals arising from data processing activities. And it's all about helping organizations identify and mitigate potential risks before they occur. And so a DPIA will typically include the first thing, description of the processing activity, deciding what you're doing with the data. So explicitly stating its purpose and the nature of the processing that you're carrying out, looking at the idea of the data subjects, that's the individuals, and the categories of personal data that you're storing, and then the duration of the processing activity. So explicitly building in, I am only going to keep this data for as long as so-and-so is a customer, plus 6 months, might be. Then you have the idea of the assessment of necessity and proportionality to assess whether the processing is necessary to achieve the stated purpose. So, for example, storing a date of birth may well be absolutely essential if you are selling and distributing restricted products for which are age restricted. But if you are not selling age restricted information or it's products, then you wouldn't be storing. You wouldn't be able to make a case that the date of birth is necessary. You can consider whether alternative methods exist that involve less intrusive processing as well. You need to identify potential risks to the rights and freedoms of individuals. That's carrying out a DPIA actually itself, and evaluating the likelihood and severity of the risks and mitigating those risks then once. So identifying technical and organizational measures to mitigate the identified risks. That might be inside Sage CRM, thinking in terms of, have I designed my security territories correctly to limit who can see data that they only need to see? And then you need to think about the identifying the what is the current state of the features available to you through Sage CRM or within the database as well, and then consulting with the necessary supervisory authority. In the case of the UK, that would be the ICO as well. And then if you've done everything, you have to write it up. You have to have a way of saying, this is the current state of risk within inside my organization as far as data protection is concerned. A strong data protection policy can provide lots of different benefits to a business, including enhanced reputation, reduced financial risks, improved operational efficiency if you're designing things correctly. There's some competitive advantage as well, because if there is no interruption to your business processing, immediately you're going to have some competitive advantage over somebody who is stumbling with regulatory problems. And you can give benefits to customers, and you will know your customers better if you are maintaining a conversation with them, actively managing the relationship so that consent is constantly being granted, and that the customer knows that the relationship is of benefit to them. Now we're just about at the end. So this is a reminder. So it's been an introduction. This is general and high level. I'm not a lawyer, remember, so this is not legal advice. And every business is solely responsible for understanding and complying with all of the applicable data protection laws and regulations in their jurisdiction. So as a partner or a customer, you have to be aware that you have that responsibility. Now, in the next lessons, we're going to continue to explore the management of personal data by looking at the management of consent, data anonymization, deletion of communications, deletion of documents, and how data is flagged externally as well. So there's lots of things that we're going to be looking at and building on these concepts as we go through the next lessons. But let's see if anyone's got any questions. Thank you everyone for coming along today. I look forward to seeing you at our next lessons. Thank you and goodbye.